Here.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be with you today. I hope you're having a wonderful conference, and we are very happy to have the chance to be part of this important gathering for folks who do such important work. And we're really glad that there seems to be an interest in the topic that we've brought to you to share. So thank you all for being here. We have one precious hour, and we hope to make really good use of it. I'd like to start with just some introductions. My name is Marina Piscolish, and I created Mapping Change, which is a consulting company when I came to Hawaii back in 1998. And I've been here working both here and around the Pacific and sometimes on the mainland, bringing skills that are like grease and glue. Sometimes making things sticky so they stick together, sometimes helping things slide past one another. But basically, it's the work of conflict and collaboration and change. That's what we specialize in. And I'm so lucky to be working with Jessica. She'll say a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica. I just started working with Marina about a year ago, and I previously worked on the mainland in Delaware. I worked in a child development lab, and I studied psychology there and did a lot of work with interventions. So the work that y'all do is really important. And then I moved into public administration space, and I did a lot of work with kids in special education. And I bring all of the skills that Marina talked about into those spaces. And so I do everything she does, just a couple of years behind her.
Yeah. So with that,
we'd love for you to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like. Just what your name is, what you like to be called, and what you do, so we just know who's in the room. We can all be here together for this last stretch of thanks for opening the chat. Yeah, for this last stretch of your conference. Hopefully everyone has a little bit of energy. So feel free to do that. And then Marina, you want to talk about yourself a little?
Sure. Let me talk a little bit about what brought me to this work. Well, the short story is that I started as a classroom teacher, wanting to teach kids to be on fire about changing the world and making it a better place. And when I went to do that work, I seemed myself to, invite conflict with the ideas I had about what would be great for kids and how we could do it. So as a classroom teacher, I tried to do the work of bringing about change for kids and for the classroom, and I found myself running into conflict. Eventually, I left teaching and went into public television. I became really committed to the work I was doing there, and as I got passionate about things and tried to advocate for important changes, once again, I found myself in the midst of conflict. I went to become an evaluator in a large school system, studying organizational change and professional development. And I started to cut and paste the evaluation sections of these reports I was writing, because no matter where the grant came from or what the money was meant to do, I would go around and interview the people involved, and they would keep saying the same things. Well, honestly, I didn't really pay attention to what this was about early enough when we got the grant. And by the time the people who should have been talking about it got together, a lot of time had passed and we kind of missed the opportunity, and one story after another. But bottom line is, nobody created a compelling vision together. Nobody figured out how to deal with the resistance that would come from the change that was being recommended, how to, work together to overcome the challenges. And so because they wouldn't do that, I kept writing these evaluation sections that said, well, this was a good idea. It might have made a difference, but in the end, we kind of squandered the time, the money, and the goodwill that was needed to make this change happen. And I got really frustrated. It was like, what is wrong with us that we seem to care enough to want to advocate for changes, but then when we get on the doorstep of making a change, we run into conflict, and we either battle it out and get nowhere, or we run and hide and don't do anything about the things that need to be done. It was at that point that I decided to make the fact that I always found myself in conflict my career choice. I was in graduate school at the time, and I just pivoted to studying organizational change and conflict as a field of study. I got my doctorate in that, and I created a center at the University of Delaware to study conflict resolution, particularly in education and when it came to working with kids. And so what I have come to believe and what we're here to share with you is be careful if you're passionate, if you care, if you're committed, because you're going to have ideas. You're going to care enough that you want to challenge the status quo. And for all those reasons I just said, if you're in the business of change, you're also in the business of conflict. And if you're not skilled at managing change, at managing conflict, you're very unlikely to be successful at helping advocate for, champion, defend, or protect what matters most to you. Conflict and change are natural partners, and they need one another. One brings the other and goes in both directions. And so we really, given what you guys do, and given the theme of this strand of the conference, would really like to help give you some insight about the skills you might need for dealing with conflict if you plan to be a change maker or are a change maker.
So in the short time that we have together, we want to talk about and explore some common beliefs we all have about conflict, how we typically behave when we're in conflict, and the cost and consequences of our actions or our inactions when we face it. And then we'll just talk a little bit about the influence of culture on these beliefs and the behaviors that come out of them. And I'll tell you, Marina has so much experience and she has a whole lot to share. And we've managed to figure out just a little slice of a really giant pie for you guys to have in your afternoon. But there's like so much more that comes down to this and the skills, but we're just going to focus today on the beliefs and what those costs and consequences are of having them. So the first thing that we want to know, and Vanessa's going to help us with a poll, is for you to just reflect for a minute for yourself. When you're in conflict and you're not being your most best enlightened self, when your back's up against the wall, when it really matters, when you really care, what is it you often do? So Vanessa, whenever you have a chance and you want to run that poll, you can select avoid the person, the place, or the topic. Do you tend to accommodate the other person's needs right off the bat? Do you work towards a compromise kind of quickly, meet in the middle, give a little, get a little? Or do you compete and dominate, just making sure that the change is so important you're getting exactly the change or the thing that you want? And we'll just wait a minute till almost everyone has responded. All right, anyone else going once? Going twice? All right, Vanessa, whenever you're ready, you can share those results and we can see who's in the room.
So this is not uncommon. All of these styles have benefits. These are each a conflict handling style, and under the right circumstances, every one of them can be an appropriate style. But the question is whether you're doing, whether in the moments that you're doing it, it is the style that is going to get you the result you're looking for. So we have a variety, people in the room can do a variety of things. They can accommodate, avoid, and compromise, and that's where they tend to go. What we don't have in the room is anybody who reports being competitive. And I just want to say that means
I got a question actually.
Okay.
How do you answer if you do one thing and then you do another thing, like I'll accommodate somebody, and then if I feel like I've been walked all over, then I'll do that last thing. Then I'll be like, no, this is
Yeah, and I think that happens to people a lot. So the fact is that your first impulse when you're up against a competitor, perhaps who's trying to dominate the situation, is that you tend to avoid. And sometimes avoidance can be kind of a retreating tactic, like, oh, I'm up against something really formidable. I need to feel my way through this, sense what I'm up against, what would be the consequences of going forward. So sometimes avoidance is a temporary strategy to figure out a second move. And it sounds like you sometimes do that. Or even if you didn't do it because of awaiting a second move, in hindsight, as you reflect, or as you see how you're being treated on the back end, then you may sort of add to your story of the conflict and then choose another strategy to engage that, re-engage that conflict. So that's not uncommon. But what is worth noting is for so many of us in the room who are avoiding, accommodating, and compromising, if we find ourselves in the company of a competitor, there's a really good chance we're not going to get our needs met. Because we don't do that ourselves as a group here. That's not our first move. And so it's just worth noting that would be easy pickings for somebody that was really committed to getting their needs met and not concerned about our needs. Worth paying attention to.
And your point is exactly right, that all of these strategies, styles are great in different contexts and situations, and we might start with one and move to another. So it's really good to know all of them. We just think it's interesting to find out what people's default tends to be.
So what really explains the answer that each of you had to that question? The answer, what explains the answer you chose is, one, your observation of your behavior over time, but your behavior over time is informed by, at its root, a belief you have about conflict. So your actions or inactions are really rooted in a very personally held belief that's in your head about what conflict is, how you fare in conflict, what the rules of conflict are, and how that goes for you. So you have a belief, as you see at the top of the cycle, then you run into a conflict. And out of that belief, you're going to respond or react. But the reason we're talking about this is because it's hard to respond or react beyond your belief. If choices exist, but they're outside the scope of anything you can imagine, you're not going to choose them, even if they exist. So your beliefs are the boundaries of what's possible for you. And so it's worth becoming aware of what you believe about who you are in conflict, what happens to you when there's conflict, how you handle conflict, because that's a reinforcing cycle. So you hold a belief, then you experience a conflict, you will respond or react out of that belief. It will create an outcome. And that is very likely to reinforce the belief that you originally had. So it's kind of a self-confirming belief cycle that we would like to see you interrupt.
So we wanted to kind of explore this with each of the options that we just used in the poll. So all of those actions came from a certain belief, and we're going to present a belief. It might not be exactly what you hold, but something that kind of it could explain for somebody why they react the way that they do. And so it's okay to see yourself in one of these, and it's okay to not see yourself in one of these, but to notice what that belief is for you, what specifically is driving it. And we're just going to give some examples. So if you believe that conflict is bad, or that it's a hard thing, or that it's scary, and that given that it's bad, hard, or scary, that you can't handle it, that you're not interested in it, when a conflict arises, you're most likely going to avoid it. If something is really bad and scary and you have no ability to address it, it's very likely your choice and your natural default would be to avoid. When we avoid a conflict, we then give up our power in that conflict. We give up our ability to control the outcome. So the conflict's going to move on without us. The person or the place or the topic, that issue is going to keep driving forward, and you'll have no control over the influence. So likely whatever thing you wanted to see, whatever you wanted out of that situation, you're not going to get. Whoever stood up for what they wanted, whoever asked for the thing, whoever moved on without you while you were avoiding it, that's what's going to happen. And so that's going to reinforce your belief that, like, I can't handle it and I didn't get my needs met. And so thus I can't handle conflict.
If instead you believe that conflict isn't actual, you believe there are winners and losers, that conflict is a battle for dominance, and that you never win. Like, you might try to battle, but you always end up losing in the end. Then when the conflict occurs, you may just volunteer to lose from the beginning. It's like, fine, whatever you want. I don't even want to waste my time in this. I don't want to feel the stress of it. that'll be okay. Yeah, if that's how you want to do it, let's do it that way. If you do that to avoid losing by volunteering to lose, rather than losing at their hand, losing at your own hand, right? You made yourself the loser rather than waiting to become the loser. The outcome is you don't get what you wanted out of the conflict. You might not even have your needs of interest to anybody or expressed. If that happens, it's likely to reinforce that conflict is a battle, that people vie for control over the outcome, and I never am the winner. And so it reinforces the notion that you're not good at conflict, you're the loser, so you volunteer to lose more quickly.
You might believe that conflict is a place where the easiest way out is to split the difference. The easiest way out of a conflict is to say, I'll take some of this and I'll give you some of that. We're both just going to get a little, we're both just going to lose a little. So if that's how you feel, if that's what you believe about conflict, then when a conflict comes, your first reaction is going to be, oh, you want this and I want that. Okay, so how about we both don't get that? Or what if you get a little and I get a little, and then we both are kind of upset? But that's okay, because look, we made it through this conflict really quickly.
And it was fair.
And it was fair. Yeah. With when you compromise, when you're working towards that, there's a sense of fairness and time efficiency. Like, don't worry, we got this. We're both going to get something. We're both going to lose something. And in that outcome, if you use that over and over, you might never be fully satisfied by the result. You might always feel just a little bit like you didn't get it, like you didn't exactly get what you wanted. So then you're going to just say, well, that's what happens in conflict. That reinforces your belief that in every conflict, someone wins and someone loses, or we both kind of win and we both kind of lose.
If, on the other hand, you believe that conflict is a game, might be one way to think about it, or it's a process. It's an experience that if I engage it well, I can get my needs met. Maybe the word win is the wrong word, but I can win my needs. I can win what I wanted out of this conflict. So if I play, I can succeed. So if you believe that and a conflict occurs, there's a good chance that you're going to approach it in a way that you might, in fact, get your needs met. Be understood for what your needs are. Negotiate the outcome you were looking for. If that's the outcome you get, it's going to reinforce your perception that if I engage constructively, I can get my needs met. So this is the effect of belief. Now, whatever belief you hold about conflict is probably going to heavily shape the response you have to conflict when you experience it. And the response you have to conflict will almost always reinforce the belief that you started with.
I think I'm seeing some stuff in the chat. Let's see.
And are there two more people in the room?
Yeah, I'm going to let Vanessa handle that.
Okay.
These first two sound like learned beliefs that people who hold have learned. They have no power in a conflict. Maybe it was a short period of time. Maybe it was fast. Yeah. Two people getting what they need by compromise. That's true. That is true that in a compromise, two people can get what they need. Though usually the nature of compromise is that someone's getting some stuff and someone's not. I feel called out, but they all sound pretty awful. They're not awful. They're just what we learn and what we know how to do. None of us just like come into the world like trying, exploring. Usually we're not just like exploring and come like creating some brand new response or brand new way of handling things. We learn what we experience around us, what we are told is the right thing to do, or what we've observed by looking around is the right thing to do. And then when we just try things, like you might be someone who just like always had an opinion and you always stated it. And if you were around people who like accommodated, then you were like, oh, well, I can always state what I need, right? It's just kind of the experiences that you've had.
Or conversely, if you started out naturally feeling like you should be able to state what you need or tell your point of view, but you were in an oppressive environment where it was like, I don't know why you're speaking. I don't want to hear from you. You know, if that's what happened, you learned that someone bigger that can dominate will shut you up and shut you down. And that when you come into a conflict, then you may be sizing up, is this person I'm dealing with like that? Do I have to worry that they are going to stifle me, step on my needs, shut me down. And that's a really painful experience. So sometimes we just volunteer for it before it happens because we've experienced it with others and we're seeing a situation that smells a little like that for us. You also have to realize that, we didn't come from necessarily excellent models in our own homes. And when we learned conflict, we were small and weak. And so we learned about conflict from a place of being small and weak. And so you don't come to the experience of conflict from an empowered place. You learned it as a child, and you probably learned it in a cultural or contextual setting where you didn't have a lot of voice and choice. So it's something that either you're carrying forward, or you have to unlearn and learn to do things differently as an adult.
And whatever you learned was adaptive.
It was responsive to the situation you were in. It worked, right? So now the question is it still working for you, or is it limiting what's possible for you? And that's really what we want to invite you to think about today.
So what is a good belief to have?
So I'd like to suggest that the better belief would be not that conflict is good or bad, that it's an opportunity for positive change. It's not good or bad. What we do with it is good or bad. So this belief is the belief I would like you to take and put in place of wherever it's hardwired in here. I'd like you to take this belief and try to replace what's in there now with this possibility. Because from this belief, all kinds of new things are possible when you encounter conflict. And one of the reasons, one of the things I'm going to invite you to do to really, because there's nothing in an hour. If you didn't hear anything we said, this is the most important slide. It might be the only thing you take with you. And I hope it's the thing that you will remember. And how I'll hope that you will remember it and hold on to it and know where to find this belief the next time you need it is because you're going to write it on your imaginary index card right here in your hand. And you're going to write the words right now with me. I want to see hands up. Conflict is an opportunity. Look what you're writing, right? See the words for positive change. I encourage an exclamation point, a flourish, a smiley face over something. Write that, see it, say it out loud to yourself. Conflict is an opportunity for positive change. What would my life be like if I actually believed this? Now, having held on to that possibility, take that index card with that written, and I want you to put it in your imaginary back pocket because you are going to not know where to go looking for it. The minute your stomach does a flip or your jaw tightens or your throat feels like it's closing up because conflict is upon you and you're like, I just did a workshop. I was taught that there was some place I could start this from a new place and maybe end up in a really new place when it's over. But I have to start with a new belief. What's my new belief? Conflict is an opportunity for positive change. Because if you believe that, you might choose to do something you haven't done before, and you might get a result you haven't gotten before. So let's just try it on. If you believe that conflict is an opportunity for positive change, and I just want to say this, conflict is not good or bad. It is natural. It's inevitable. Sometimes it's necessary. And when handled appropriately, it can be powerfully transformative. That's what we hope for you, that you begin to believe the possibility that conflict helps you create the changes that you see needed in the world. But you won't create that change. You won't be part of making that change happen if you don't build your muscles and your tolerance for passing through the land of conflict, because all change is possible on the other side of that dark forest. So if you believe that conflict is an opportunity for positive change, and then the conflict happens, your response is going to be collaborative. It's like, okay, I believe that if I can explain what I need and how I see things, and if I give you room and time to do that, that we might come to an understanding about what we're trying to do here together. And we might find a way that we can get that win-win outcome, right? Or as close to a win-win as might be possible. And as a result of having chosen to be collaborative and seeing the outcome we got, I reinforce my belief that conflict is not a horrible thing. It can be an opportunity for positive change if we engage it appropriately. That's the new belief we're hoping that you walk out of here holding on to, and then trying to live into out in the world.
So we talked a lot about all these different beliefs, and I wonder if people can already find a belief that they have that maybe isn't exactly what we shared, but can explain the reason that you use the same default that you use. But one of the places we know this all comes to is where we've grown up and what we've experienced. And it's usually different than what everyone else has grown up with and experienced. So we're going to do a quick breakout, and we know probably not everyone's in a place to speak. Maybe people are just listening. So we're going to have 3 or 4 people in a room. And we want you to just answer whatever feels safe about these questions. What did you learn about how to handle conflict?
Growing up.
Growing up, where did that come from? And then how does that early lesson help you in your current day-to-day? And how does it hinder you? What are some of those ways? And when we go back in time and bring up memories from the past and think about how we've grown, what we've experienced, we want to acknowledge that there's lots of different ways that could have happened. And it could be a really great experience. It could be not so great. You could be proud of it. You could be a little embarrassed, and all of that is fine. And only share what feels safe. And then just keep it confidential in your group. We just want everyone to get a chance to try out these beliefs and these thoughts and see where they came from, and to hear maybe what's different about someone else in your group.
How long will they have?
We're going to have about 10 minutes. Since there's going to be probably 3 or 4 people, everyone can have 2 or 3 minutes to speak. And Vanessa, are you set with breakout rooms? Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
Will we put these questions in the chat?
Yes, I will broadcast them once you get into.
And then you'll get a
room.
timer when it's time to come back with a 2-minute warning?
Yeah,
or
I'll give
one?
a 2-minute warning.
Thanks, everyone. See you in a little bit. Here they come. Sadly, that's usually the group I'm in, and I'm still talking when they Zoom us right out of the small group. It's happened. Welcome back, everybody. So we want to talk, I hope you had a fruitful conversation and that was illuminating. Either illuminating that you were in a group with people that had some similar early experiences as you when it came to conflict. That's what a lot of people experience, because we share context with some of those people. Either we grew up in the same place, we grew up in the same way, we're culturally similar. One of the things that's true is you were all children at that time, so you shared the culture of being a child, and that has some common attributes generally for folks. But this conversation is worthwhile because if you don't know the influence of that early upbringing, if you're not aware of it, if you're not awake to it, it can have a lot more sway over your day-to-day actions, even today, than you realize. and that possibly than you want it to. Because we learned about conflict at that earlier time, we can almost reduce it down to adages, sayings about conflict. And I'm just curious, when you think about what you discussed, what are some of the conventional wisdom about conflict? Did you hear in your discussion some people describing the situation where might is right? That's what you learned about conflict early on. Or you do what is said, that the reason all that somebody needs to say in a position of power is because I said so. Did you come up in an environment where there was a belief in retaliation, an eye for an eye? You hurt me, I hurt you back. You do me wrong, I do you wrong. That's how we settle the score. Or did you grow up in a place where someone was picking your battles? They were teaching discretion, self-control, only, avoiding conflict unless truly necessary. So those are some of the things you might have learned along the way, whether they were ever said just like that. But what can you share with us about some of the rules of the road where you grew up? What messages did you receive? If you'd like, put some in the chat for us to see if you can reduce it down to like a teaching, or raise your hand and let us hear from you into the room. And Vanessa, we'll ask you to help us see who might have their hand raised, because we can't see everyone at the same time.
Chelsea is sharing that discussions of gender and age determining who was right in regards to the conflict and sharing their voice. Yeah, I often talk about being the oldest sibling. And so growing up, like my job was to be the peacemaker. So I was supposed to help everyone else figure it out. But my younger siblings were allowed to roll around in the mud and get a little dirty and fight a little bit. But for me, when conflict came, it was like, Jessica, you know better, go, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's pretty true, at least with birth order and age for me.
And I know, as it's mentioned by Chelsea, that gender often is a determining factor about who's allowed to have voice, who's allowed to use aggression, who's not, who's allowed to be expressed, who's not, who's allowed to battle for their needs, who's not. So those are some things to pay attention to, because when you run around in your current world, you may find when you're up against similar dynamics that you find yourself feeling a lot like you felt back then, and perhaps responding like you did back then, but you're not back there.
Denise says that children were seen and not heard.
That's a popular saying.
Yep. Pick your battles that would matter in 5 years. Oh, that's interesting. Yes. Help advice to live peacefully. Because I said so, listen and obey your elders. Yeah. What I'm recalling right now around conflict is hearing my grandma tell me, keep the peace. It's okay. Let it go. Oh, I was a nanny in Spain for a summer, and the grandmother always used to say, no pasa nada, which means it doesn't matter. Like anytime there was a conflict, it was like her saying, and it was like rings in my ear. I remember hearing her say it. No pasa nada, nothing. It doesn't matter. Nothing happened. I think grandma's got wisdom.
Well, that's assuming she's saying that at the right time.
That's true.
Sometimes it does matter. Sometimes it's worth beefing over, if you can beef well, especially. So one of the things we often ask people is, somebody just said, I learned in the households that the parents do not ever have conflict in front of the kids. There was no learning of conflict resolution. That's another one. Conflict. We don't have conflict here. Everybody knows there's conflict, but we are not acknowledging it. We don't act on it, and you don't see it. It happens privately, or, you handle conflict by going into the great chill, where everybody's icing each other out for a while until it blows over or warms up, and then you move on without having resolved it or discussed it. So we all saw stuff. We all learned stuff. And the question is, how is that affecting you? Tell yourself loud conflict in public. When I do this exercise in the larger training, I always say conflict was a very family affair. Like if Jess and I were in a family and having a conflict, we're all talking about that conflict, and we might be talking about it over dinner. Everybody has an opinion, everybody's weighing in on it. And while we weren't ever allowed to be mean, violent or aggressive. We were allowed to be loud. We were allowed to be passionate. And we were expected that it would be talked out, that it wasn't buried. That wasn't done. So you can imagine if someone who grew up like me got together with someone who said, we never had conflict. It was hidden. It was handled privately. And then I want to have a conflict with this other person and they're running away from me and I'm running toward them. You can experience like the emotional turmoil of both of us saying, I don't know how to do this if you're not going to do this the way I know how to do it. But I don't know how to do it the way you want to do it. And that adds to a second conflict on top of the original conflict, which is about something. Now you're having a conflict about process, about how you're supposed to handle it, if you're supposed to handle it. So one of the questions we often ask folks at this point in a larger training is, when you think about these things you learned, especially when you're in a powered down position as a child, when you're in a powered down, so now in your life, do you think that you are reliving that same dynamic, those same lessons you were taught from a similar role of feeling powerless? Or are you experiencing those same dynamics, but now it's the same dance, but you're in a different position? Like you're the parent or you're the boss, but you're doing the same thing that you saw. You're believing the same rules of the road apply. Or third option, are you doing something intentionally very different? And usually folks that fall into category 3 have been to therapy, read some books, took some classes, and they're doing something different because of how much they didn't like what they learned back there, how not helpful or healthy it was back there. So I wonder which is true for you. You can think that thought yourself. Are you doing the same thing in the same role? Are you doing same thing, but from a different role, maybe the position of power in that role? Or are you doing something very different intentionally? And here's the thing I want you to get from that question. 1, it's interesting to note, which it is, but 2, no matter what your answer is, you're still dancing with that past. You're still in relationship to that dynamic. Either you're reliving it now, or you're living away from it, but by intention. And so that is important for us to understand how really defining our early experiences of conflict can be, and why it's worth getting in touch with what that was, what you learned, and how it's serving you or not serving you these days.
So then we take that upbringing, we take that, what we learned as a kid, what we learned in our family of origin or in school or our places of worship, wherever it is you got those messages. And then we have to notice that there's that. Then there's how we're supposed to act with conflict in our community. Then there's how we're supposed to handle conflict in our profession, and then more largely in society. All of these things interact with one another. Like how you handle things in your family might be different than how you're expected to handle things in your profession, versus how in your, let's say, volunteer group that you work with, like how people in that group. And those cultures that are existing in those different spaces are either formal and like explicit and expressed, and people are saying like, in this group, we talk about things that are hard. Or in this group, we don't, like in hushed tones, like we don't talk about conflict here. We don't bring this up in the agenda. Or you walk into your workplace and you just kind of look around, you're like, how do people handle this? And it's kind of a more invisible culture. It's a little more unspoken, but both are always understood by the group. It's like you walk into it and you figure it out and you learn how to live in it.
So one of the really useful things is to sort of pay attention to who you are when it comes to conflict in these different important settings in your life. And are you really different in those different settings? And if you are, why? And how does that serve you? For example, if you feel like you're much more capable of handling conflict in your professional setting, but you don't feel like you do that as well at home, what are you doing at work that you're not doing at home? Or what are the assumptions that you're operating under at home that are different in your work setting? And what is the impact on you and on others? Because remember, when we talk about being able to have a conflict, it's both getting your needs met, but sometimes, especially when you're an advocate, or a champion, you're advocating for needs of others. You're raising questions and pushing forward concerns about changes that are needed, about conversations you want to see had, that you're defending or protecting something, a principle, an ideal, a healthy practice, a family. And if you can't do that job because it runs through a path of conflict, that's a real challenge. So, figuring out how these rules apply about conflict is often, it's very helpful to notice a particular dimension about cultural norms in any of these settings. What are the rules about power? How much respect and regard for hierarchy and power differences exist in these different settings? Because you may find that across the different cultures you're part of, some settings are less tolerant of just deferring to power difference. They want to have a more egalitarian ideal. They believe everybody should have a voice and a chance to be heard. In other places, that is not assumed. And in fact, if you attempted to act like that was true, they would shut you down and tell you, like, why are you speaking? We've heard from the boss already, and we're supposed to accommodate right now. We're not supposed to challenge or interact or have a deeper conversation about this. So one of the things that can often, there are many, many rules that shape the way we handle conflict across cultures and cultural contexts. But one of the things that might be most instructive for you when you think about the beliefs you hold about power have to do with the beliefs you were taught. The beliefs you hold about conflict is to understand the beliefs you hold about power, how much respect and regard you have for power. I personally am someone who has very little tolerance for hierarchical power. It's why it's fortunate I don't work in an organization, because they're full of expectations about deference to power dynamics. I made my life trying to create egalitarian conversations and flattening hierarchies so that we can have more creative and collaborative exchanges. But that isn't operating everywhere. And sometimes when I step into a space, it's disruptive because it's not the way the rules operate there. But these are the things we want to figure out about ourselves and notice about ourselves in the different settings, because our ability to step up to a new belief that conflict is an opportunity for positive change may have something to do with the beliefs we hold about our place in the power dynamic or our understanding of the rules in the room about power. And that's smart, because you don't want to be stupid in a situation where power is at play and you're acting like you're in a more idealized, movie where that's not true. Doesn't mean you don't want to challenge it or attempt to change that if you don't like the way it is, but it does mean know that it's happening there.
So we want to have some time for questions, but we're going to answer the first question you might have, which is like, what do you do now? Now that you've noticed something and maybe there's something you want to change or do differently or explore further. And if you're ready, we've got 2 free workshops we do every month. So we have them scheduled for actually the rest of the year. I think I just put October and November. So we do a workshop on the art of clear, courageous communication. And it's about bringing a mindfulness practice to the preparation for conflict. I have something I need to say. I have something that's difficult I need to convey. Bringing in mindfulness and preparing yourself for that conversation. And those are always around lunchtime and on October 6th and November 1st. And then we talk, if you like this like chat about styles, we do a 2-hour workshop on a matter of style, navigating culture and power. And we'll dive into all those styles in much more detail, and we'll go through how to make the best choice for any given conflict. We'll give you some tips on that, and they're free, and you can just register on our website, mappingchange.com/events. So we hope that if you're fired up about this and you want to do something different, that you'll come join us, and we'll see you again.
Jess didn't mention that also at the bottom of that screen is that we do have the whole enchilada training that we're offering at the beginning of next year. It's a 5-part training. It's 10 hours total. It's virtual. And we're inviting a small cohort of about 15 people to go through the experience together. And there is an introduction to what that training is going to be, where we can answer your questions. And that'll be happening in the new year if you're interested. So here we just open it up with the time that we have left. Feel free to drop something into the chat or raise your hand, and with Vanessa's help at seeing who's interested in jumping in here. You know, if it's a question that can't be answered in the time we have left, we'll be grateful for it because it'll let us know what comes up for folks when we do this. But if there is something that we can answer, would be really happy to. Do you have a slide on that? On what? Carol asked. You can turn on your camera if you want, Carol. I mean, turn off your mute.
I was interested in what you said about how your childhood experiences, say, in your family could inform your way of thinking about conflict for the rest of your life. And I just wondered if there was either a book or a, article or something you could recommend that would help.
At the moment, I'm not coming up with a book or an article, but I can recommend that second training. The first one helps to come to the second one if you've done the first one first, but the second one really dives into that in some more detail. But if I will look for some resources around that and look to sort of post them to the website. So you might keep checking back there as we add resources and information. Thank you for the question, though.
Thanks. This has been incredibly helpful.
Good.
I think Denise raised her hand.
Yes. So I have always worked in nonprofits, and nonprofits, every now and then you can find a nonprofit that doesn't have like a power hierarchy existence of it, but more often than not, you do find that depending on who is the senior leadership on it, their emotional intelligence is, much farther off than somebody who is actually doing the work day in and day out and sees, the things that need to get changed or things that could change. So I've always kind of been like middle management, even if that's not my title. Like, it's just my personality where like I am compassionate and caring, and I want to help people. And if people have a need and we don't have that, like, I'm quick on trying to find solutions and bring up ideas. The only downfall with that is I don't have a great track record on communicating these things properly. I don't even know if it's communicating, actually. So I struggle with avoiding more recently, but in the past I've tried to kind of compromise, but then like come back with more ideas on how we can work together, and then I get shut down.
Yeah.
So like I just go back and forth between basically like challenging and then avoiding, challenging and avoiding. And it more recently it's because I don't want to lose my jobs and I don't want to use my credibility, but it does take something from me that is, I feel like less joy and less peace out of it, because I know people need more, but like.
Well, Denise, I think what I'd say to you is
heard.
that's that you've placed yourself empathically in the middle in a system that needs to have a conversation, right? And you don't necessarily have everyone's agreement to be in the conversation, especially the power players. And so you do that at your own risk. And so what I would say to you is it's really great for you to have some ability to analyze the position you're putting yourself in and the risk you're taking. And then for the role that you're playing, it sounds like having really solid skills, because it sounds like you have all the right intentions, but you may not have all the skills you need to do the hard job you're trying to do. And there are skills that would help someone doing what you're doing in the position that you're doing it in, being in the middle between parties who may want very different things. And even some resistance around the change that's being talked about, because change is hard and change is resisted, especially if somebody's benefiting from the way it is now. They really don't love having the conversation about how it could change to be better for others because it's kind of good for them at the moment, right? So all of that, there's a bit of an art and a science to it. And so having the skills really can empower you to not take on that emotional toll that you're talking about, where you start feeling diminished and smaller and then not so good about yourself. And I would just comment to Clara, I think in the, I know we're coming to the end, but I just want to say, do you find that the outcomes of conflict are dependent on both parties being open to collaborating versus all the other ones? I was telling my group that it really depends on who I'm in the conflict with that will impact how I approach it. And that is exactly true. It is, and that's why when we talk about wiser conflict, which is what we're teaching, it is the same thing that mindfulness teaches. Why I say conflict resolution is a mindfulness practice, because the same thing that mindfulness offers is what wiser conflict offers, which is awareness, fuller awareness of what's going on here inside me and around me with others. Second thing is compassion, compassion for what matters to me, compassion for what's mattering to others. And the third thing is discernment. What's the right way forward given all this? And those are the three things that mindfulness gives you: awareness, compassion, and discernment, which is wisdom. And that's what wiser conflict can give you too. And so, yes, your question is an accurate way to describe it. It does matter. I will say this: one person with good collaborative skills can persuade and motivate others who aren't collaborative to be collaborative. If they believe that participating in your process that you're offering to help lead can get them their needs. They may be willing to let you help them get their needs without using the tools they usually use. So it is possible that not everybody has to be equally skilled, and that one person can lead and still make an impact, leading collaboratively. And with that, let me just direct you to have any further questions. Feel free to get in touch with us. We hope that we'll see some of you. Tell your friends about it. If you have family members that you want to have better luck with in conflict, send them to one of our trainings. Maybe we can train them up for you, make them easier to work with. But
Thank you.
thank you for being here. And good luck with the very important work you do.